Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Peter Swandale, President of the Bendigo District RSL, and I will be the Master of Ceremonies today's memorial service. This service honours the memory of those Australian and British prisoners of war who died in the Sandakan prisoner of war camp or in the infamous Sandakan to Ranau death marches in North Borneo, Sabah, during the Second World War. Following the fall of Singapore to the Japanese in 1942, a 2,700-strong Allied contingent was transferred to Sandakan by the Japanese in 1942-1943. Their task? To construct a military airfield, using not much more than their bare hands. As the war grounded on, conditions deteriorated, and in January 1945, with 2,434 Allied prisoners at Sandakan, the Japanese decided to move 455 of the fittest prisoners to the Jesserton from Sandakan, but halted them at Ranau, owing to Allied air activity on the west coast. This was the first march. At the end of May 1945, there was a second march from Sandakan, and in mid-June a third, comprised of only 75 men. There was no medical assistance and little food during these marches. Anyone who could not keep up was disposed of. Despite this, about half of the prisoners completed the march, only to die at Ranau from illness, malnutrition and ill treatment by their captors. Back at Sandakan, 200 prisoners unable to undertake the second and third marches also died, bringing the death toll there to about 1,400. Of the 1,000 odd prisoners who left on the death marches, about half died in the attempt. The rest died at their destination. The story of Sandakan and the death marches is one of the most tragic of World War II. It is also one of the most heroic. Despite appalling conditions, the prisoners never gave up. Their heroism, their determination, and their indomitable spirit are testimony to the strengths of the human spirit and an inspiration to all. Of the 2,434 prisoners incarcerated at Sandakan, 1,787 were Australians and the remaining 641 were British. 6 Australians who escaped during either the marches or at Ranau were the sole survivors. I've had the privilege to visit Sabah. I've been to where the POW camp was located and walked around the site. I have viewed parts of the track of the marches and I've been to Ranau. The memories of the sites and the memorials to the brave Australian and English soldiers, plus to all of the local people who paid the ultimate price for helping the Australians and the English soldiers, will never be forgotten. We have a responsibility to ensure that the Australians who lost their lives in Sabah are never forgotten, and we will ensure that this service, which has been conducted in Bendigo in March, continues each year. I'd like now to welcome the City of Greater Bendigo Mayor, Councillor Jennifer Olden, to do the Welcome to Country acknowledgement.
I acknowledge the City of Greater Bendigo is on Dja Dja Wurrung and Tangarung country. I'd like to acknowledge and extend my appreciation to the Dja Dja Wurrung people, the traditional owners of the land that we're standing on today. Today we pay our respects to leaders and elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and the hopes of all Dja Dja Wurrung people. We express our gratitude in the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual and cultural costs of that sharing, and our hope that we may walk together forward in harmony and in the spirit of healing.
We'll now proceed with the laying of the wreaths and floral tributes. When your organisation is called, please step forward and lay your wreath. Peter Swandale, Bendigo District RSL Sub-Branch. Representing the City of Greater Bendigo, Her Worship the Mayor, Councillor Jennifer Olden. We have apologies this morning from Wendy Lovell and Jacinta Allen. Representatives of the Bendigo District RSL ex-service organisations, post 1975. Vietnam Veterans Association, Bendigo, Paul Penno. RAF Association, President Ray Gray. Second 22nd Lark Force, Lois Newman, Pat Patrick. Representing the Commonwealth of Australia, Federal Member for Bendigo, Lisa Chester. Representing the State Parliament of Victoria, the State Member for Bendigo West, Marie Edwards. Representing Australian Navy Cadets, T.S. Bendigo. Australian Air Force Cadets. Jean Wright, representing on behalf of Gunner Jack Robinson, 4th Anti-Tank. Leo Wreather, representing Herman Wreather. Diana Evans, representing Charles Albert Woodford. Sean Gill, representing Harold Gill. Joy Haberfield, representing on behalf of remembering Les Hasty. Kay Fraser, representing and remembering Thomas Fraser. Pat Burke, representing and remembering Basil Tennyson. Alan Constable, remembering and Bill Constable. Anne Berhenz, representing and honouring Russell Durant. Donald Munro, representing Will Munro. Any other member of the public who wished to lay a wreath or flowers on behalf of remembering veterans? Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today our guest speaker, Mrs. Jean Wright. Jean is a key member of the Family and Friends of Sandakan group, which brings families of the prisoners of war in Sandakan together to acknowledge those who perished at Sandakan, including the death marches, to ensure they are never forgotten. Jean will be honouring her uncle, John Jack Robinson, who was born in Avoca Country, Victoria, and served in the 4th Anti-Tank Regiment in Singapore during World War II. After the fall of Singapore, Jack was transported to Sandakan and, like many Australians, suffered through many years of hardship. Jack was part of the 2nd Death March, but shortly after arriving at Ranau, Borneo, passed away. Ladies and gentlemen, Jean Wright.
Relatives and friends of our Sandakan prisoners of war, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. During the 25 years of these commemorative services here in Bendigo, we have been privileged to hear from some excellent speakers, rightly telling of fine young men who gave their lives in defence of our country. I thank the Bendigo RSL staff and in particular the Post-1975 Veterans Association for allowing me this opportunity to share with you today the story of an ordinary country lad from an ordinary farming family. This young soldier could be almost any one of the loved ones you are remembering here today. We are rightly proud of these ordinary young men who made up the forces that defended our country against a would-be invader. On a winter's evening in 1920, the 7 Robinson children wrote loving notes to their mother, who had just given birth to a little baby boy. Each expressed whatever was important in their small world. Willie has been catching rabbits. The tabby cat came home. Auntie Maggie is coming to help with the washing. Mrs. B gave us a large pumpkin. Dad has been hoeing the garden. And 80-year-old Laura reported an amusing conversation she'd had with a neighbour who wanted to buy the baby but didn't think she'd have enough money. Names were also suggested, but farmer Isaac Robinson and his wife Elizabeth made their own choice of John Frederick to be known as John, or Jack. Jack Robinson walked the 2.5 miles to the Percydale State School in the foothills of the Pyrenees Ranges near Avoca, just to the west of Bendigo. He is remembered as being a good student, achieved his merit certificate with teacher Alan Dunlop. It is of interest to note that Mr. Dunlop was the brother of the well-known wartime surgeon Weary Dunlop, and Alan was a published author in his own right. After leaving school aged 14 years in the midst of the Depression, Jack worked as a farm labourer where his boss held him in high regard. A keen sportsman, one brother remembered that Jack could run nearly as fast as his much taller older brother. Jack also participated in road cycling with some regional success, and in 1939 the local paper spoke of his efforts in glowing terms. A cup still in existence bears testament to these efforts. Two of his brothers recalled Jack as being a good cricketer and a lovely cricketer. A newspaper article of this time names the 5 Robinson brothers, Bill, George, Bob, Herb, Jack and their uncle Bob, as part of the Percydale team. Jack's siblings remembered that he loved kids, played the mouth organ, enjoyed poetry, was popular with the girls and went to the pictures as often as possible. Sister Jessie, who is still alive at 97, recalls that when the time came, he was keen to enlist, and he would sing that fairly well-known song of the time, "A soldier boy to the war is gone." Those who know that song will know that the second line is, "In the ranks of death you'll find him." But Jack always added that he would be coming home. From approximately 20 letters still in the family, one gains the impression that Jack was what used to be known as a clean-living young man, whose Christianity was not just a belief, but a lifestyle. As a 20-year-old in mid-1940, Jack enlisted. The Caulfield Racecourse recruiting camp was to be his home, along with a couple of his Avoca mates, for the next 3 months until they were transferred to Wangaratta Showgrounds. Bertie Woodford had joined their group by then, making a foursome. At Puckapunyal in February 1941, they were transferred to the 4th Anti-Tank Regiment and sailed for Malaya 3 months later. But it was not until towards the end of that year that the anti-tankers had their first taste of warfare in Malaya, as Allied forces were gradually driven down the peninsula towards Singapore Island. Jack's neatly written letters home beginning, "Dear brothers and sisters," his parents had passed on by this time, were positive, although he didn't like kitchen duty very much, and informative, with comments and questions about home, various people, comparing the seasons, the price of wool and the like, and ended, "From your loving brother Jack." His last letter home as a free man was written on the 25th of January 1942, about 3 weeks before the fall of Singapore. Doing background reading for a booklet I put together on Jack, I discovered in a publication by military historian Neil Smith that Jack's rank was listed as bombardier rather than the lower rank of gunner, as the family had always thought it to be. On questioning Neil, he explained that he had reason to believe that Jack was promoted to that rank during fighting in Malaya. Because of his capture, paperwork necessary for the main dossier in Australia remained incomplete. Hence, Jack's family had not been aware of that promotion until about 10 years ago. The family heard nothing of Jack after the fall of Singapore until later in the year, when it was confirmed that he was a prisoner of war. After a little over a year in Changi, Jack and mate Bertie sailed to Sandakan in March 1943 as part of E-Force. As with most other prisoners, nothing is known of his time in the prisoner of war camp, the only contact being the familiar couple of cards with brief wording that seemed common to most of these types of cards, and a radio message, all that the Japanese would allow. At the end of May 1945, Jack left Sandakan for Ranau on the second death march. He died at the end of June after reaching Ranau, reportedly from acute enteritis. Life for this ordinary soldier, like many other ordinary soldiers, had passed. In recent years, his sister Jessie said it was a great blow to the family to lose him. We would recognise this as a typical Aussie understatement. My earliest association with the uncle I never knew was at about 6 years of age, when a kerosene refrigerator was purchased for our home on the farm, after Uncle Jack's legal matters had been finalised. This uncle became more real to me when an enlarged portrait photo of Jack, with medals displayed along the bottom, was proudly hung in our lounge room. Growing up, I don't recall a lot of conversation about Jack, at least in the hearing of we children. But the occasional comment by my father Bill, who was Jack's oldest brother, seemed to express all that wasn't expressed. I can see him now, sitting in front of the stove, in a contemplative mood, head bowed, hand shielding his eyes, and saying, "Poor old Johnny, poor old Johnny." Even as children, we knew better than to pry into that world of Dad's inner pain at brother to the wickedness of war, as he used to say. That deep, unspoken sadness remained with Jack's family, as with your families, throughout their lives. I have already mentioned the 4 mates who were in the 4th Anti-Tank Regiment. As I put together Jack's story, I wondered what had happened to these lads. 2 I knew had returned to their homes in Avoca from the Thai-Burma Railway. Bert Woodford had been to Sandakan, but had not survived. Where would I start? As we hear about the brief search, I would like to invite a friend, Diana Evans, to join me, please. Could I find Bert's family? It was worth a try, because it seemed he and Jack must have been good mates. Photos had been taken, letters mentioned Bertie, and he'd even gone home to the farm on leave, because in good spirits, Jack wrote home to his brothers. A little boy by the name of Bert Woodford is coming home with us this weekend, so tell all the mothers to keep their daughters inside, as they will all be after him. Extra good looking, curly hair and can talk. Except for the last 2 or 3 months of their imprisonment, they had been together. I knew Bertie came from Melbourne, so in those days you went to the phone book. I can tell you that in 2013 there were 57 Woodfords in the Melbourne phone directory, and I just kept ringing, sometimes having long conversations with unknown people, sometimes leaving a message. Sooner than I expected, there was a reply. I am Gary Woodford. Bert was my uncle. I cried. Within a couple of weeks, Diana, her brother Gary, and her mum and dad came to visit. Her dad looked so much like the photos of his brother Bert, it was uncanny. After nearly 60 years, the Robinson and the Woodford families had connected again. It was a very emotional meeting, one that I will always treasure, and I'm sure Diana will too.
I do.
Stay there. I have often asked why the Sandakan service is so important to me, or our Sandakan family, or collating Jack's story, or why meeting for the first time someone else who lost a loved one at Sandakan was so emotional. The answer remains elusive. But maybe it is because it is all we can do for these loved ones who suffered so terribly at the hands of the enemy and allied mismanagement. Loved ones we will never know in person, and the desire to keep their memory alive for those who did know them and for those who follow. The sun has set on the short day of many a young soldier's life. They are home early. Jack, Bertie, and so many others are honoured, loved, and still missed, lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
I'd like now to call on the Mayor of the City of Greater Bendigo, Jennifer Alden, to acknowledge our guest speaker.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Jean. That was a wonderful story and a way of keeping memories alive. And that's exactly what these types of events are important for, is to keep those memories alive, and to think, in this instance, of the Sandakan contributions, at Sandakan of so many. Jack Robinson obviously was highly regarded in his community and in your family, and it's wonderful to hear these stories and have these opportunities. Your story did remind me of another Jack, my grandfather Jack, who was a veteran of the First World War on the Western Front, and equally those attitudes of, you know, an average person embroidering postcards, sending them back to home to the parents and sisters and brothers, with messages saying it's all good here. And so the being brave whilst away, it certainly has been a theme, I'm sure. It's wonderful to be able to see so many people here today, and having been to several of these events, obviously a smaller crowd today because of COVID, but I'm sure there's others who couldn't attend who will also be thinking about events today. And I'd like to thank the organisers. Thanks to Peter Swandale and the RSL and the Sandakan group who have worked so hard every year for this remembrance. And thank you to everybody who's come today, and I hope that you're able to keep memories alive as well. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, those who are able, please stand for the ode, the last post, 1 minute's silence, and the rouse, played by Henry Livingston, and the Australian National Anthem to be led by Scarlett Abbott.
Colour party, ho!
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget. Lest we forget. Let us rejoice, for we are young and free, with golden soil and wealth of toil. Our home is girt by sea, our land a bounty nature's gifts, our beauty rich and rare. In history's page let every saint advance Australia fair, in joyful strength, and let us sing, advance Australia. 'Neath the radiant Southern Cross, we'll go with hearts and minds. We'll rake these wealth of snow across all the lands. O'er roads and garnet across the sea, take this share. In joyful strength and let us sing, advance Australia fair. Thank you, Scarlett. Thank you, Henry. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our service this morning. I'd like to thank you all for coming along today. Again, due to COVID, we've had to change it, but however, I believe we've honoured them very well today. I'd also like to thank our Navy cadets here today. Thank you very much on behalf of the RSL. I think they did a wonderful job, and I think a round of applause for them as well. Ladies and gentlemen, you are invited to join us for lunch. Hopefully you've received your invite, and part of that you'll receive your token. If you haven't got one, please come and see me afterwards. On behalf of the RSL and the members of the RSL, thank you. Good afternoon.